Become a regular. Dr. Wexler has become a regular and very dynamic speaker as a professor of business ethics and management at SFU's Beatty School of Business. His work appears in over 125 journals and in 10 books. He is the recipient of 4 teaching awards, has been selected as PricewaterhouseCoopers 2004 Leader in Management Education, and sits on the editorial board of 4 research journals. Dr. Wexler, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. You caught me unaware. And thank you, David and Larry, for organizing this. And I'll save the thank yous to the end. Let me begin by outlining the basic structure of what I'm going to speak about. And of course, it's an origin story, the origins of misinformation, or if you will, how did we get to the post-truth era? What is the means for it? So I'm going to talk about in 6 sections. Each of them will be about, in my head, 5 minutes, but I always elongate them and add some coloring as I go along. The 6 sections are, once again, the title, Misinformation or the Road into the Post-Truth Era. The first section I'm going to talk about is give you some idea of the narrative genre I'm using, what I'm going to use as my explanatory framework. I am not using a causal model, and I'll discuss why. The second one is to discuss the prominent existing explanations of the origins of information. So I'm going to look at how we popularly explain this phenomena. And of course, popular culture is and continues to make a relatively a big thing about this in both its positive and negative forms. We'll be focusing primarily on the negative form, since I'm going to argue that we're a stiepele which shares a worldview and is offended by the misinformed around us. And third, I'll be talking about the particular approach I'll be using, was this interdisciplinary discussion called socioeconomics. And the way I'll be doing it is to introduce this idea of what makes the center thin. My thesis will be that the center is thinning, and as a consequence of this thinning, a whole bunch of divergent groups are casting about for what is factual, what is evidence, and in some senses, whose story is a more accurate version of the events around us. The fourth section, I'll talk about the key dynamics, which makes this an analytic area, something you could pack in your head, and I'm going to call it attention markets, the 3 C's. In that discussion, attention markets, I'm going to dig in and give you my version, which I've worked on with Judy Oberlander, my co-author, and since I've lost my site, basic guide and editor, with regards to the recent publications we've successfully put into some journals. So the attention markets, I'll close with the discussion of the positive and negative framing of thin centers. And underneath all of this, you'll hear the ghost of W.B. Yeats talking to me, saying that to be modern or in modernity, the center cannot hold. This is the leitmotif that runs throughout the talk. So once again, narrative genre, prominent existing explanations of misinformation, socioeconomic explanation with the emphasis upon the center thins, attention markets, and the positive and negative framing of thin centers. And then, of course, with David's help, as already introduced by Larry, I will entertain, if that be the word, questions from you via some chat mode. Due to my visual handicap, I will not be able, if you flash any questions on the screen, to be able to respond to them. I do have good news for those of you who know me quite well. On February 3rd, I'm scheduled to get another corneal transplant. So the next time we meet in this genre, I may be able to read the screen and also look at my notes, which I have over there in less than 32-point font. So let's move to the first thing. What is the explanatory mode I'm going to be using in this discussion. And the reason I want to do that is that I don't want what I'm talking about to be confused with causation or with a pure history tale of how we got here. The narrative genre I'm using is something called backcasting. It's used by individuals who take an idea that is empirically being addressed at the present and move it back to give it its, if not origins, the drivers that allow us to get to the place. It doesn't want to prove what I'm saying, that there is a post-truth era. It accepts that not as the truth, but as a recurrent popular cultural issue that we are trying to make sense of. So backcasting is what I've called it. And that notion is very popular in people who are interested in retrodiction. Also, if you're interested in this in Rudyard Kipling, he calls it just so stories. We have a phenomena and we look at just so. If you look at Stephen Jay Gould, he calls these kinds of stories origin stories. You're more likely to think of it as an evolutionary story. How did we evolve to this point? And this point, by the way, is a discussion of modernity as talked about rather than as proven. The approach I'm going to be using is interdisciplinary. I'm going to rely on two disciplines, or one, a hybrid discipline called socioeconomics. On the one hand, the socio component of the discussion tonight comes from institutionalism, which is in my work and in this discussion today, a solution to the problem of a social, political, and economic order. Like, in other words, how do we get to order? And we'll find out post-truth is mostly about an epistemological, how knowledge gets created, a breakdown in it. There's a breakdown in this notion of some institutional order. Then from economics, we're going to look at the behavioral implications of collective attention markets in the information society. I'm going to argue that what used to be a stiepele restricted or tied to a pure commercial market has now moved into society general, and those amongst us who have figured out how, where, and from whom to get attention are really the modern super capitalists. And of course, these are the richest people in the world. This is the Bill Gates. This is the Teslas. In some senses, this is the modern successful politician. Attention getting rather than monetary accrual. And we'll discuss the importance in attention markets of influencers, and interestingly, how in a market that focuses upon attention, utility replaces factuality. If a thing is useful in drawing a crowd, it is. And we'll look at that as proved by algorithms. That is, there's data to prove who amongst us can draw the biggest crowd and moreover capitalize upon it. So let's wait for attention markets in the discussion. Now, section 2, and they get longer as I go along. So at first I do a setup, which is a kind of in drama, the presentation of the persona, the cast. The existing popular explanations of post-truth or the proliferation of information. The most common one is Donald Trump or Trumpism. I talked about this with you the first time I spoke, perhaps 2 years, make it 3 years ago. Donald Trump or Trumpism is an indicator of the role of controversy and divisive politics in creating and sustaining diverse competitive audiences. In this idea, information is why let the facts get in the way of a good story. So we have this one explanation, that people who could create divisive groups seem generally, whether it's in Poland, in Canada, in Russia, to attract attention. This attention, as we're going to say, is based upon facts which are clearly drawing a large crowd, and that these facts tell a good story, but the story really isn't all that factual. And we've seen this, of course, in advertising. What's interesting in advertising, we never look for advertising for truth. We immediately assume we have to discount advertising. However, we're going to find out that with Trump or with modern political leadership, the controversy and the divisive politics are not treated as advertisements because they really are impactful. They are not whether or not we dine at Denny's or we dine at Olive Gardens. The second explanation, and you'll see this now in the geopolitics of the present world, the growing importance of simplification, especially in the hands of strong-armed leadership regimes. They are increasingly finding a fertile soil in the midst of complex and threatening problems, like the one when I addressed super crisis to you. These complex problems are globally threatened, like climate change, food insecurity, escalating global inequalities. I've written some work on this called Wicked Problems. And what we do now is we basically pose a simple solution to these wicked problems: sustainability, carbon tax. And of course, this is a form of simplification, which is misinforming, but at the same time, it acts as a palliative, calming down the imminent fears and threats of large groups. Moreover, the simplification is controversial since we usually have different forms of the simplification. The people who argue for carbon tax clearly are arguing against the fossil fuel industry, et cetera, et cetera. And so both of them are going to gather facts to support their simplification. Once again, there is nothing untrue about simplification. It just uses very thin facts selectively. So what we are not interested in liars, pants on fire kind of thing. What we are interested in is thin facts, loosely strung together and highly selected as a mode of gathering large crowds, harnessing the energy of these crowds and using controversy to stir and capitalize upon these crowds. Third, and at the highest level of abstraction within the existing information is the theory of empires. Within the theory of empires, or the predominance of a superpower, we are presently in a liminal zone or period of unraveling or decline. The theory suggests that after the dominance of an empire, say the Roman Empire or the British Empire, there is a period in which controversy and contention arises due to vacuum created in the dislocation of a once clear center. Take away the center globally, and a whole bunch of ruffling of the feathers, peacockishness, Comstockism, if you will, if you're interested in censorship, starts emerging. The present explanation posits that the American empire is unraveling in popular culture. And this decentering creates counterpublics emerging not only external to the once dominant center, terrorists, protest groups, but also within it, the dominant center. If one is preoccupied with the center, as most discussions of truth are, what is the center? These counterpublics are seen as enemies, terrorists, or internal dissenters, misinformed, all of them, following false gods, conspiratorial, frightening, but all of them like a choir of dancing devils, screaming thin truths against the center, which once, if we're nostalgically oriented, which once was make America great again, which once was this past, which once was when I was younger, how clear it was when a man was a man and a woman, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea is that whether we're interested in psychobiographical notions of centering or organizational notions of centrality, or more macroanalytically geopolitical, when the center thins, a whole bunch of peripheries rush in with explanations contrary. So from the let me use as my leitmotif, as I suggested earlier, or the theme that runs throughout this. I've always found when teaching, one of the things you have to do is have a drum beat in the background, something that unites the tempo and rhythm, so that when you lose the attention of the listener, they go back to the leitmotif, the unifying principle. And it's from W.B. Yeats, the poet, who says that what marks modern society is that the center cannot hold. We find this in Eliot, we find this over and over again, and we find this in the theorists I'm going to rely upon today without name, called institutionalists, when they talk about deinstitutionalization. Yeats' poetic reach is not intended to suggest that our version of modernity is unique. To be modern isn't necessarily to be now. Modernity is a particular way of talking about time flow. So if we were around during the Industrial Revolution, we understood modernity. It is what I call a radical experience of the present as different from the past. So modernity is a recurrent phenomena in which one explains a decided thinning of the center. By the way, the thickening of the center is usually experienced as a form of totalitarianism, where there is one big truth, often oppressive. A version, if you will, if we're interested in popular culture, of surveillance capitalism gone wrong. A dystopian state, very thick center. And our longing for the thick center occurs when we're in a period where the center thins. And when we're in a period where the center is too thick, we long for a thinning. We're kind of like eager children. That's what modernity is. This is a state of constantly being in the process of growing up. It's a wonderful state, really, in my opinion. This idea of the center being thin or thick, and I want to do this because this is a religious group called together. The thinning of the center we are going to use can be explained in secular socioeconomic terms, which is I'm going today in our digital society, or it can be explained in sacred terms. If we are interested in cultures heavily invested in a sacred center, we might address the thinning of the center as the compartmentalization of sacred. Going into shul on Shabbos, going into church on Sunday, but otherwise, by and large, being secular. Or we can increasingly discuss the thinning of a sacred center, which we're not interested in today, in the sidelining of agents of the sacred, the disparaging of the expertise of rabbis, or the disparaging of the belief that there are no prophets among us who speak directly to the sacred, or the derogation of origin stories lodged in the primacy of a mythical version of the center, the sacred. And what's important about the sacred centers is that it is finding a home in modernity in the notion of a radical version of the present called mindfulness or spirituality. I'm not going to take the lecture in that direction. But those people who work with me closely understand that that's one of my passions as well, to understand how it is that modernity lodges itself in a version of the sacred. We are interested in a secular thinning of the center. And in the humanities, this can be, and I now refer to the humanities because that's where the socio component of my explanation comes from. The institutionalism really is a fiction of the social sciences, lodged in this idea that there is some kind of set of rituals embedded in law, embedded in medicine, embedded in science, that provide us with a core, a series of conventions. Whether if we're economists, we could locate it in the invisible hand. These are magical incantations. In epistemological terms, where we're going to take this, epistemology is the determination of what we determine is credible, factual, or true. So not all things are factual, not all things are true. And if we're interested in a sacred way into that door, we begin to say God imbues things with truth. If you're spiritually oriented, you might say that nature imbues things which are true. If you're going in the direction I'm going in, we're going to talk about the foundational center through a series of conventions in science in law, and in the assumption that politics is a checks and balance process that actually confirms that there is a center, which allows us each to be individually unique. But by and large, when we come to the center, like good Jews, we agree upon certain foundational principles. Even though largely in our own lives as Jews, we often go off into our own little version of what is permissible on our Shabbos table. Or if you will, in your life, what is true and public versus what is secret and private are all framed quite differently. So in epistemology, we have two competing big stories. They're really interesting big stories. And largely, that's the two icebergs behind the center does not hold. The first epistemological story in the socio component is called foundationalism. Foundationalism is also a form of inevitableism, or things are inevitable. We will find them out. The world is mapped. We are in the process of mapping the world. The world is out there. There's one stable goddamn world, and we're going to map it. And we're going to get it right. All truth is provisional, but we're going to get it right as we age or as we grow historically. So we tell our story, eschatology, as a moving progression towards the Hegel called it the unfolding of the dialectic, all these squabbles. We're moving towards truth. If you're religious, we are waiting for the Messiah. The future is very hopeful. And the reason that, of course, the future is hopeful is that in this tale of foundationalism, we're inevitably going to get to the truth. As a teacher, we are going to solve this damn problem. That's why we're rational. We just got to keep at it, keep at it. And while we're doing that, each time we do it, we get a provisional truth. We get it a little better. We evolve. But there is a center. The center is the conventions, the methods, the techniques we use in getting to the truth. Think about foundationalism as an escalator, going upward slowly and inexorably, in which hard work is necessary on the shoulders of those who came before me, so I go, says all this notion of this eschatology. Foundationalism is beautiful. Foundationalism believes that the center is there, although each one of us is allowed to experiment. There is a big, big foundational thing going on here, and we're all in it together. You'll find this in modern talk, which we're going in that direction, in the digital economy called the commons. We're all different, but when we get to the commons, we understand what it means to be a mensch, what it means to be civil, what it means to follow the norms, mores, and laws. Good people are like us. And we're going to find out that in post-factualism, in post-truth, good people are like us, but others are irksome. They don't agree with our foundation. They actually are misinformed. They're the irksome others. When we have a pure foundationalism story, we don't have irksome others. There are differences in their experiments. We're very tolerant. We're very tolerant because we're not threatened. The second epistemological iceberg is called contingent reasoning. It is not inevitable. It is not foundational. It is what I call tribal or neo-tribal. We go off in little groups to make little worlds which compete with one another and pay attention to different things. When we doubt each other, we get our group together and say, this is what I believe, don't you? We make little cliques and little seal pods. We're not engaged in some big collage. We're working on art pieces in which I want to be the top of my little heap. And in my little heap, I can run it if I figure out how to tell a story which keeps all those people in my heap followers and believers in my story. If you're a contingent reasoning, you say, as information changes, guess what I have to do? Pivot. Change my understanding of the world. find people who are pivoting with me, become an early adopter of new ideas. We're going to find out that in modernity, our version of it, what is happening is foundationalism is giving way to contingent reasoning, and I'm going to explain why. And I'm going to explain that it's only a short period of time in which this occurs and recurs and recurs. It's like contingency is like a snowball going downhill. Foundationalism is like an escalator going uphill. Both are necessary for the ongoing dynamic. Think of it as a kind of manic depressive state of the world. Rather than getting the balance right, most of the time we're either too high or too low. One of those early TVs where the fuzz sets in often and you play with the antenna, trying to get the adjustment just right, which economists call the equilibrium. Now, going back to Yeats, which is our leitmotif, foundational reasoning, in foundational reasoning, the center holds. And despite the varying tastes and perspective of individuals, there is a shared understanding or set of morized norms and conventions. This doesn't mean we're all conformists. Not at all, not at all. It's just that we all agree to come to the commons and act civilly. I think you aren't very smart, but I hear you. I don't think you're misinformed, conspiratorial, or out to get me. I may believe I'm superior, but by and large, I think we could organize something here. Foundationalism is interesting. It doesn't get rid of difference at the individual level or at the mid-level, but it allows for an umbrella in which we all agree to be beneath something. We could be beneath God. We could be beneath nature, but we're beneath something and we all agree to the humility of being beneath something. There's foundation. We all agree that the law isn't perfect, but it's what we have to follow. We all agree that the experts may not get it right all the time, but when in doubt, I'd rather rely upon the expert than my cousin, butcher, and friend. In contingency approach, we're going to find out that we begin to look at large groups of people, whether they're butchers, cousins, or friends, or others, as evidence that a position must be true because it's gathered so many people. Those people who aren't going to like foundationalism see it as elitist. Those people who are going to like contingency theory see it as liberating. We'll find that there's certain ideological tensions that resonate here. If you want to reduce the center, and if you want to get smaller government, or if you want to get less teachers and more peer edutainment in the classroom, you're positioning yourself either as a contingency, thin the center, contingent thinker, or as a foundational thinker. The more you think of yourself foundationally, the more you think of yourself as believing that there is a provisional truth. Once again, when I say provisional, I mean the law is not perfect. It will change as it goes along. But at this point, that is best practice. Whereas if you're contingent, you're going to say, there are many different laws, and my idea is to figure out which laws best suit my people. And basically, the laws of others are really screwed up. And we'll find that there's a nasty tone to both of these. The nasty tone in foundationalism is that individualism can get squashed as the center grows too thick. So if you want to write a dystopian future, you could do either you could do so through contingent reasoning. A dystopian future is the way that post-truth is played in most of the literature. We're all falling apart because everybody's bickering. There's too much factionalism. Nobody seems to know the direction we're in. We're like Stephen Leacock's protagonist, going off on the horse in many directions at once. Or you could tell the story of the future foundationally, which is the way Orwell does it, as problematic. Big Brother is watching me. And as a consequence of Big Brother, we all know there's a truth, but it's not a real truth. It's an elitist group imposing its Protestant Ivy League boys school upon all the rest of us who are crushed minority groups whose voices are being squashed. Okay, so you get the players moving as a bit of bricks in the pyramid being built by me as Pharaoh in this discussion today. So contingent reasoning and foundational reasoning we have. Once again, and these are important because these are the epistemological blocks in the socio part of the economics. Now let's move towards the meat, or if you will, the vegetarian byproduct in this discussion, socioeconomics, the interdisciplinary discipline, rather than the large fragments of knowledge I've been throwing at you at this point as a way of stimulating and loosening up your mind to deal with a more precise model. So right now we have a bunch of jagged ideas moving around: Yates, the center periphery, contingency foundationalism, some notion of thinning versus thickening, and all of these are moving in a bit of an Irish stew. Let us settle that stew down into a palatable meal right now. Okay, so get your fork, your knife, and we're going to do some cutting and some eating right now in terms of the solidification of what was previously the stew. This evening, I will be focusing upon a socioeconomic explanation in which I employ a two-tiered model of the relationship between the center and periphery, a model used in the social sciences to explain the dual influence process in which ideas and with them the authority to govern flow from the periphery to the center, as is the case in all contingent reasoning, or from the center to the periphery, as is the case in foundational reasoning. Contingent reasoning, the ideas flow from the periphery to the center. And what we get there is a whole bunch of voices from the women's group, from environmentalists, from the extreme right, all working together to make a big collage, which is innovative as all get out and go. And notice that as the more you use contingent logic, the more you're interested in innovation, the more you're interested in originality, the more you're interested in uniqueness, the more you're interested in change. If you're attracted to change, you love contingent thinking, because everything is in the process of becoming. Things are stable only momentarily. All that is solid melts. And if you're really a contingent theory, all that is solid melts, turns fluid, and then gaseous. Gas is the ideal state. Pure, where information wants to be free. Nothing is concrete. Pure information. Total immersion in the brain state called singularity, which is a return through contingency theory to foundationalism, in its most abstract form. We do the dialectic very quickly when we do that. Now, in this idea that we have a kind of beating heart, contingent, moving from the center to the periphery to the center. We even just see this in COVID right now. Take away COVID and the cities build up again. Where I am sitting here in downtown Vancouver, it's almost like a ghost town. Everybody's moved to the periphery. This is a period of change. The center is not holding. Facts are not clear. What are the rules? You're experiencing a mini liminality of thinning, in which we're all going into our own steeplers and saying, well, what are you doing? How are you dealing with this? What is your way of getting through this? And we're talking to each other, and we'll discuss that, how that breaks out. In foundationalism, this the downtown where I'm sitting is mighty big. Everybody comes down here wearing kippas, wearing tattoos, and they all agree that they're in one big beehive. They talk to each other. They don't always agree, but elevators are full of people with entirely different lifestyles, listening to different music in their head. and dancing to different ideas of what it means to be a great lover. But they're all together in some kind of, if you will, melting pot that has a center. Let us think about the center holds model in socioeconomic terms. We're interested now in the center holds, stability, order, and of course, anytime you have stability and order, guess what you have in terms of truth? There's truth. It's in the stable order. It's provisional and it's not going to last forever, but there is truth. The best practices on Wednesday, January 26th are, and most people of us know what the best practices are generally. And we know where the law stops and starts and what the differences are. But we're going to find out the more contingent we get. Let's look at the first one. Downtown works. The commons is a workable place. In the center holds in the socioeconomic, foundational reasoning works like this. In general, socioeconomics attempts to explain the coexistence in the center holds of individual differences and freedoms rooted in subjective tastes and preferences with the overall orderliness of the center. So we get a two-tier model. Individuals are free, as they are in markets, to engage in almost any legal, moral, other behavior. You can go to any restaurant you like. You could have your sexual activities in different guises with different people, as long as we all agree that when we're together, these are the rules. So we form this in separate microanalytic center, and we have a way of, now, what are the mechanisms for doing this center? It can be thought of in economic terms as the invisible hand, creating this overall order where my individual demand preferences and your demand preferences meet one another with a set of supply, and overall we get an orderly equilibrium. This is the price of cabbage on January 26th in the IGA, in the building that I live in. Which is very different from when we go to a shop and we start, the price of cabbage is not at all set. And there is a commons, and we'll discuss that contingent commons. It also is in political terms, where the center is the legitimately elected government and its operating institutions, with this idea that the legitimate government is there because it represents the public. And notice we have the public. When it is believed that the government represents a public or a version of the public or some portion of the public, we start moving into contingency. That's called a thin notion of governance. When we believe that the market fails with great frequency, we have a thin market. We have a market, but it's constantly failing. I'm sure they're saying this in Afghanistan. I'm sure they're saying this in Kyrgyzstan. I'm sure they're saying this in Venezuela. In fact, they're saying this right now in Canada as inflation grows. There's something thinning going on here. The reliable center seems creaky. There's a crack. It's creaking. When the center holds, dispute over facts can be checked by going to the experts or authorities at the center. It can be relied upon in the pricing mechanisms set by a stable center. There's a strong belief in a center as the arbiter, whether it is the arbiter rooted in laboratory sciences, legal debate, or the logic of the people speaking through its electoral politics, the center holds. When the center holds, we believe they may be screwed up, they may be wrong, but in the long run, it's better to stay with the center we know than begin to break it down too quickly. So I prefer to go to a school with a teacher rather than have peer education predominate, where my classmates are going to teach me. When you do believe that your classmates are going to teach you, you are in a very interesting contingent logical thinning. If you watch the program, The Sons of Anarchy, you understand that all motorcycle groups are contingent reasoning. They think differently than nuns, and they think that the world they live in is one in which you have to be honest to live outside the law. Only honest people live outside the law because they follow the rules of the tribe. And if you follow the rules of the tribe, you have to be honest because you can't phone a policeman from the center to help you. They're written in a Bob Dylan song, a center for the dislocated, so to speak. So in this model, the center holds in the socioeconomic. Individuals are free to go about and express their opinions or to boycott this or that firm, but despite controversy and debate, civility holds, or in economic terms, equilibrium over time is achieved. This is not to say that in an era in which the center holds facts are true. It's merely that facts can be checked, that there are no errors, or a truth is not a truth forever. It is understood to be provisional. The center will move us towards greater progress, but it is slow. And if we stick with the center and slowly change the center, it will be inevitable. So foundationalism is a belief, by and large, that there's a trade-off between the individual micro-analytic level and the macro-analytic center. That if we are going to change the center, we should do through the slow development of coalitions from the periphery to the center, not through the overthrow of the center by a coalition. Everybody saw what a coalition is? Coalition is a series of peripheries. So if a group of Hell's Angels get together with a group of white supremacists, you could put together a coalition like Trump has done. I will move Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel, and I'll get certain Jews together with certain white supremacists, together with certain anti-abortionists. I will put together a team who doesn't really belong together, and I will move them into the center. That's very, very interesting logic. That's where we start getting what we're going to call later counterfeit centers. Google, many platforms now create open dialogue with this idea that we all know what's going on, but it may be a counterfeit center, permitting too many facts to go off in all directions at once. But I am now pushing forward. What is the truth era in foundationalism? In socioeconomic terms, as we are learning, the truth era, or that which comes before post-truth, I prefer it factualism and post-factualism, but really the emphasis has been upon truth in the popular literature. In socioeconomic terms, we have learned that the truth era is one in which the center holds and facts can be checked and verified because there are conventions, methods, and authorities bolstering what is credible. It is credible because the rabbi told me. It is credible because the market has determined it to be so. It is credible because the physician told me so. It is credible because the reading on the cancer machine indicates that this is what I have. Notice in all of these, there is an idea that even if there is a truth, it may not be a pleasant truth, but there is a truth. And cancer machines will get better, and rabbis will be more learned. One must not confuse the truth era, or that which precedes the post-truth, as one in which all things are certain, but rather one in which there are a set of process and credentials. So it's not like there's great certainty in foundationalism. It's rather that the uncertainty is something that can be managed because there are processes and credentialed experts which sift through information, data, and facts and produce a rank ordering of what at any one point in time is believed to be the best option. Fact. We got to recognize that. Fact is a kind of very precious thing. It's not about being certain. It is about, at this point in time, this is what I believe. We played with this when we were children, when we picked a daisy. She loves me not, she loves me. Playing with this idea of how facts rotate in a dialectic. In a dialectic, she loves me, she loves me. The opposite expresses itself immediately as we say one. But what happens in foundationalism is the opposite doesn't rear its head as soon as you say a fact. You actually do believe that that fact if not enduring, is at least stable. The container holds, the center holds. All is not liquid turning to gas in front of you. If all is liquid, guess what you need to do? Run around with containers. It's called a flood. In psychiatry, flooding is when reality just overwhelms you. You're in disarray. You break down. You're flooded. Your foundations have disappeared. You're out to sea. You're lost. You're broken. You don't know which way is up. People look at you like you're mad as a hatter. You get on a bus naked. You don't understand anymore what civility is. You've lost the center. I recall various times in my youth experimenting with drugs. I enjoyed losing the center. Colors would pop out. Losing the center is not an unattractive state. To pose it only negatively is to forget the thrill of a lost center, that great, great fascination with getting drunk, with watching a horror show. Because I don't want to make this too simple. As an ethicist, I've learned that if you paint something as good, people draw to it. I paint very few things as good in itself. Many of us want to get flooded more often. I personally look for that state. I call it creativity, where my assumptions and what is factual break down. And all of a sudden I say, holy shit, you could look at it this way. I've been thinking about this for ages, but my God, why didn't I think of this? And I'm like a child. I'm 7 again. I'm Pablo Picasso in my brain. It's wonderful. So let me not speak to foundationalism as God's Bible, which many of the popular culture is. So being flooded is sometimes desirable. And I say this only to rest assured that I don't want to make your life simple. I don't want to romanticize one form of the dialectic over the other. I'm a true believer that tension is the state of mental acuity. If your mind is tense and alert, you're alert. If your mind has a version of the facts which are overstated, you're in trouble. But if your mind has a version of flooding that puts you out to sea forever, you're not creative. You're so far ahead of your time, you're lost. You're Leonardo da Vinci discovering the helicopter in 1300. You're that far ahead. They'll never catch it. I remember in Montreal, I worked in Verdun, a hospital for the insane. I was a student, maybe 18 years old. And there was this guy, Boris. I think it was from Russia. They kept on pulling. I was a night, I had an order. I used to bring in food to people. You know, I was nowhere near psychiatry, but my ambition at that time was to become a psychiatrist. And Boris would tug on my sleeve. He would tug on my sleeve. Moshe, that was my name at the time. I became Martin later in life. The school system does that too. Moshe, Moshe. I'd say yes, in a kind of broken Russian English. He'd say, why not Eden? Why this? And I remember thinking, this guy's totally whacked. When I hit 28, I woke up one night and said, Jesus, why not Eden? Why this? I finally caught up with this guy who had flooded. So when people are flooded, I personally am quite attracted to hearing what they have to say. And I think this is an interesting time to live in right now. I love it. I'm not averse to post-truth. This doesn't mean, by the way, I want to be crazy, but I'm just trying to say, let's preserve some dignity for the antithesis in this discussion. So in the truth era, best practices are confirmed. In business, we often go to the notion of best practice. In science, it is frequently called the confirmed hypotheses. In medicine, it is clinical evidence. In an era of fact, there's a rank ordering of evidence. It is not that this is the fact, it's that these facts are more probable than these facts. So there's a rank ordering of evidence. While not all the publics agree on every portion of this rank ordering, there's an understanding that debate over rank ordering is what makes the difference between fact or fiction. There's a process. We could debate over whether or not this is more healthy than that, whether lima beans are more healthy than oatmeal. We could debate on whether or not this is fourth or third stage cancer. We could debate on whether or not that individual is somebody who ought to be jailed or ought to be put on probation. And these are interesting ways which are only possible if you have some foundation for the debate. Let's think about the problem in linguistic terms before we turn over. The Tower of Babel is one way of telling the breaking down of the center. Everybody spoke different languages. In that story, we have what I call the edifice complex. We're building a building and we're going to tickle the tummy of God. And God looks down and would rather not have his tummy tickled. So he decides to disrupt the work by dividing all the planet into different languages. And as a consequence, the work grinds to a halt. A nice story. It's a thinning story. The center breaks down. It's also a creative story. New languages are discovered, but it's a thinning story. Okay, I think you got the truth era. It's an interesting one. The dialectic in this is between the stability, the overstability, and the pursuit of stability. But there is a stability. In other words, unstable, you could put things in cups. Even if things are liquid, you have a cup. We're going to find out when your cup breaks down, when it runs over, when it cracks, we start entering the post-truth era. Things don't fit in their containers anymore. And when we really get into the naughty part of post-truth, it's gas. Everything is gas. It's like COVID. It's invisible. You don't even know how to stay away from it. You don't even know if it's in you. You don't even know if you're good anymore. You don't know if you're on the right side or the wrong side. Gas is interesting. It has no edges, no boundaries, no compartments. It just keeps on flowing in directions that you are unable to discern. Interesting state. And not one to be frightened of, at least in my world, but it is an interesting state. It's in chemistry anyhow. Let's look at post-truth. Within the socioeconomic explanation I'm employing today, post-truth era is one in which the rank ordering of information by experts in the center is called into question. All of a sudden we get alternative medicines, we get alternative legal systems, we get alternative truths, we get alternative facts. All of these are reasonable. In foundational world, you get an expert. In post-truth era, you get a panel of experts who don't agree. If you watch TV tonight, guess what you're going to find? A panel of disagreeable experts. Disagreeable to one another and providing you with very little clear directions other than say, oh, I like Chantal. That Chris Como, what a pain in the tuchus. And experts come into it, they grow into expertise, and they fall. Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, if you will, or more interesting as experts, all the ones, Donald Trump, rise and fall. The question at hand in post-truth is what stirs the periphery to start eating into the center? Why does contingent reasoning all of a sudden come into whole? Why does there become competing centers? In alternate facts, there are competing centers. Competing centers means that this is my rabbi, and he is not only different from your rabbi, he thinks your rabbi is an asshole. He thinks your rabbi is wrong, wrong, wrong. So what you get is, you want to fight? And we'll find out there's a lot of bellicosity in the movement quickly from foundational regime to contingent. You could say, if you want to do this back to our geopolitical, globalization not only breaks down. 12 years ago, we were talking about one globalized market. Now we're talking about all heavily bounded mini regional markets and territories, each with their own pulsating center. Britain moving and London's financial moving to Frankfurt, New York giving way, Chicago being replaced by Dallas. This is really interesting. United States being replaced by China. Russia taking over Ukraine, Europe. So there's this idea of peripheries. By the way, the power to the edges. Okay, in the business school, we are responsible for a lot of that talk because we believe, in part of my ethics course, everybody is very fascinated with agility, pivoting, decentralization, Bitcoin. All of these are thinning. Moving away from the center to create many divergent coded options, each with their own privacy, each with their own setting. And agile, because quickly, and notice what happens in pivoting. In pivoting, you can't rely upon what a person says because new information just came in. And what they said 20 minutes ago is no longer what they believe now. In other words, in a world where peripheries start predominating, you want to find some kind of clarity, so you join a counter public, a public. You throw in your lot with a periphery. You abandon the center and find back to Orthodox Judaism. The world is breaking down around me. What I need is some kind of connection to some kind of certainty, some kind of order. When I poo, I have a prayer. When I eat, I know what I can and can't eat. And I'm not just saying this for Orthodox Judaism. I'm using that metaphor within the context of joining a group that has a center different from the foundational center at the core of the commons. And in Quebec, this battle is really internecine. It's really working itself out. I love watching Quebec because in the terms of this battle, whether it's the Habib or the use of religious garb or the use of language, they've decided to truck themselves right into this, or attacks on the non-vaccinated. All of these should capture your attention. Quebec is experimenting, not because it's right, but it's really interested in this dialectic that I'm addressing today, the post-truth. What is the foundations, or what in our commons should a person be allowed to wear, cover their face in the commons? And that's not something that I want to answer here. But the more contingent you get, the more you say, of course. The more foundational you get to say, well, there should be certain agreed upon standards. I'm not sure what they are, and I'm willing to accept that standard. You know, I'm willing to let that go, but here's some other standards I won't accept. So the question at hand, and let me move into the next step rather precisely. So we've got a meal starting in front of us. Now we want to break it down into bite-sized portions. The question at hand is, what in contemporary terms thins the center or strengthens counterpublics or mini-publics? Now, what causes the center to thin? The branch of economics I will turn to in answering this question, and where we start getting into bite-sized pieces, I call them the 3 C's. We're going to take 3 C bites, okay? Is the branch of socioeconomics that I'll turn to in giving this question its due, focus on the emergence of the attention economy. And within the attention economy on 3 market drivers. I'll get to these in a second. Let's turn to attention markets. Everybody, we're on 3. We'll be out of this discussion in about 20 minutes. So bear with me. And I apologize for my divergence and tendency to dry your mind through analogy. When Judy and I first started publishing material on attention markets, and once again, Judy is now my staff and guide. I am blind, and I say this with all the respect I demand of somebody who will talk to you in a very abstract manner. I think it was Whitehead, who said that when asked how he thought of process theory of philosophy, said, you know, goddammit, I haven't seen since I was a kid. So there's no use dealing with reality as you see it. I have to make things up as I go along. I found that so reassuring when I first started losing my vision at age 26, by the way, very reassuring, because most of this is made up. I don't know if it's true. That's why I'm so fascinated by it. By true, I'm clearly seeing this as pictures in my head. So when Judy and I first started publishing material on the attention markets, I think we just got one in the International Journal of Sociology and Social Policy. We soon discovered, after we had several papers rejected, that most of the reviewers who received the manuscripts were psychologists and treated attention as a property of individuals. So at first I said, well, let me write about these attention markets. And I started writing about them, and people were saying, they're very, very bright, Mark, but you got it all wrong. And I said, okay, so, and I found out that most of us think of attention in terms of the individual, their head's on a swivel, they move it around, and they pay attention to X and less to Y, or they pay attention to Y. Notice that notion of pivoting, and that individuals have a unique portfolio which is based upon psychobiographical propensity, paying attention to X while others pay more attention to Y. Moreover, attention is treated as a limited resource in psychology, mostly through the idea that when one pays more attention to X, one pays less to Y. And importantly, one can only pay attention to a set number of things before one falls into disarray. So I recognized that the people were reading me all wrong, that they were thinking of attention with their eyes. And I was thinking of attention as a property of collectivities, not when a head moves, but when a whole bunch of head moves in the same direction. I was thinking about attention as audiences watching a play, the same play, rather than another play. So I was interested, and I discovered that after being rejected 4 times until I realized, Jesus, I got to step around these psychologists and talk to socioeconomists who understand institutionalism. And finally, I found this attention market literature, which was very satisfying, only because it was no longer interested in the pivot head, the bobble that you see in the back of the car. It had a very different notion. It had an idea that a large group of people have an agenda and they move their attention in different directions, not as individuals, but as groups. And certain people pay attention to Trump. Other people pay attention to Merkel. Other people pay attention, not just geopolitically. Some people pay attention to the doctor. Other people pay attention to the rabbi when dealing with their health. And collective attention, let me bring, my discussion does not throw any stones in other words, my discussion today does not throw any stones at the psychology of attention, but rather it focuses upon collective attention. Or, as suggested earlier, that 2-tier model in which individual attention at the microanalytic level enables a high degree of personal preferences, while at the macroanalytic level, the one we're now going to move to, collective attention focuses upon whether the public gaze, not just Moshe's head, but a whole bunch of heads like Moshe, sharing ideas, information, or watching PBS rather than Fox News. So in this, what we have is a 2-tiered model in which individual attention at the micro level is a high degree of personal preference at the macro analytic level, where a collective attention focuses upon whether the public gaze identifies a center or the collective attention fragments and identifies with multiple competing centers. Do I believe, and we could see this in the classic Jewish literature, do I believe in the God or do I believe in many gods? monotheism, polytheism? Do I have one boss, or am I a collaborative multi-bosser? Do I have an office, or do I work in a portion of a cubicle within an office? Is my primary identity my Jewishness, my Canadianness, or my citizenship in the world? These are all interesting questions as to where the gaze goes, what you prefer to pay attention to, but not you, a whole bunch of yous. And today we talk about a whole bunch of us in the digitally connected culture, where we share information with some people and we do not share information with others. Where we watch channels and we listen to podcasts that other people find terribly misinformed. I read reviews of the podcasts I listen to, and I'm always surprised when they say, this guy's so whacked. They're such a lefty. My God. And I look at it and say, oh, wow. I've been listening to this and treating it like manna. It speaks to me. All the people I know think this is like the way. The idea, of course, of multiple competing centers speaks to contingency logic. To explain the post-truth era, we must look at collective attention arising from the credibility of multiple competing centers. By the way, you will discover multiple competing centers moves when we move from broadcast television to streaming Netflix and knowledge platforms. Google's a perfect example of a center with multiple publics looking in different directions. It's what economists call a multi-centered market. It doesn't give a price. Some of it's free, some of it's costly, some of it points towards the right, some of it points towards the left, but all of it goes towards a version of the center, which is not a real center. It doesn't offer guidance, it just offers connectivity to people like you. You don't want to connect to people not like you. My friend Sherry Turkle calls it, once you start living on the screen, you no longer map nature. You map socio-economic nature. Constructed information. Information made discoverable to certain groups. Notice that when we map a stable world, we look for facts. Science is interested in mapping a world that's there. Most sociologists, most linguists, most people who are interested in Yeats are not interested in mapping a world that's there. They're interested in mapping a world that you find useful. Most businesses are interested in mapping a world that you find useful. One of the ways I was drawn towards attention market was through the business school, because it has a long history of dealing with marketing. It has a long influence with the power, or it has a long history with the power of influence. It has a long history with public relations. The business school knows why deal with truth when you could deal with utility. If a thing is useful, it's valuable. If a thing is valuable, you can convince people it's true. The essence of what I teach is what I call a truth for utility substitution. This doesn't mean I teach lies, but I am not particularly interested in the facts, even if I use numbers. Most science has moved in this direction. In order to win grants, you just don't have to produce theory, you have to produce something that's useful. And notice when a thing is useful, it doesn't necessarily have to be all that factual. It's selected facts. Propaganda is useful. It actually is a distortion of the facts. Commercials are useful. When we see utility, by the way, we give it a discount. When you watch a commercial, guess what you do? You don't say, oh, that's factual, I'll take it to the bank. However, when you watch an expert from the center, you say, oh, I'm not going to discount that. But we're going to find out today, when we watch an expert from the center, we say, I'll discount that. I think he's selling stuff. And you start entering into the modern realm. A bit of a backstory here. With regards to attention markets, we're all familiar with the fact that marketing was used as attention getting as a means of selling goods and services to consumer. We're also aware that public relation uses influence messaging as a means of enhancing the reputation of clients. So collective information or collective attention is not new to us. These two elements introduce attention markets, and that's where I first came across them, but I didn't think too much of them because they're largely contained in areas where we can identify and discount the messaging. If you can identify an influence message, you begin to discount it. But if you can't determine an influence message from a factual message, you start discounting factual messages. In thinning, we can't determine. As we move into thinning the center, we can't determine influence message. They're well hidden. When I teach ethics, I'm mostly teaching virtue signals, which are influence message, not truth messages. Influence messages are interesting. It's the essence of parenting. Telling things which are useful for the age and type of audience you're talking to, rather than telling truth. And it's very important when those get mixed. In the world I lived in, they're very mixed. And we'll see some distortion effects, some lovely creative effects too. I am not fearful, nor do I ask you to be fearful of distortion. As I said earlier, I used to go out of my way to take LSD. So clearly, I have a preference for distortion. And you're bearing with it in this lecture. Okay. I'm going to have some good ideas, but you'll have to work through some of the manner in which my brain works in a pretty jagged, but I think interesting way. Thus, when we hear a commercial, we immediately recognize that we are no longer in the realm of fact and prepare ourselves for a tale in which the facts are curated in order to induce us to purchase our product or service. Or nowadays, we skip over the commercial. We buy the premium, which removes advertising. If you have Spotify with commercials, it's such a pain. If you buy the premium, guess what they take out? The commercial. They're not interested in fact, though. They're interested in, if you want pure entertainment, we won't interrupt it with influence entertainment. But nowadays, we don't really have a good idea of what's entertaining and what's influence. Because most of the stuff you're watching as entertaining has embedded commercials. The laptop lifts up and you see the Apple computer. In Midsummer's Murder, they're all driving Volvos. So the idea is, of course, that once we have some kind of screen, some kind of organized reality, we want to sell stuff, we want to influence. And we'll discuss what we want to influence for. And if you're a periphery, you're an influence group. And what the center should be, the center should be absorbing interesting peripheries. This is what I do. I like to get absorbed by the center. I'm clearly a tangential but interesting thinker. I do consulting for large companies who want the kind of insight I might have to offer them, whether it's Abbott Laboratories or Merck. Okay, the idea here is not that I am a truth teller. It's just that I have a way, mostly I think because I've been blind for so long, I've seen things that aren't there in ways that excite other people's imagination. What is interesting about attention market is that in the digital information age, the one we're interested in right now, we're all looking at our screens here. In the digital information stage, we can no longer distinguish a selling story, one in which the facts are selected or curated, from a fact pattern story, which is rooted in evidence. This is totally mixed up now. Reality TV is constructed. Now, for our purposes today, I want to simplify the concept of evidence used to rank order facts and symbols and suggest to you that it's no longer the same. The concept used to center facts and symbols, facts, data, and symbols, to make it in the center is now shifted. It's now, we pay attention to the rank ordering of data, facts, and symbols based upon the algorithmic authority embedded in an attention market. What the hell's algorithmic authority? It's the rank ordering of facts, data, and information, which puts things high up on the Google page. It's the personalization matrix in Netflix that says Mark Wexler would like this show. It basically is the way of dividing large chunks of preferences into collective publics that like the same thing and can be influenced by facts, data, and symbols from a particular curated storyline. By the way, that always was available to writers writing to particular audiences. But now we have it available through an actual commensurable. Commensurable means that the algorithmic score allows you to compare things that are very different by the audience size, the gaze, and the amount of attention the audience pays to that message. It's pretty much, and you could do this whether you're interested in sustainability or you're interested in condominium purchases. Who's drawing a larger crowd? Where do large groups of the public put their attention on January 26th? Thank you for putting, at least 100 of you, your attention here tonight. And seriously, I'm in the business of gathering attention and turning it into capital, mostly reputational capital. It assuages my ego. I'm an older man. I'm not doing this for the instant gratification of cash anymore. When Larry and David said 100 people are coming tonight, I said, woo! For this 73-year-old blind kid, wow. I must be significant. It was very cool. It's nice. And it's largely my reason for creating and curating this information for you tonight. And I'm not saying a whole bunch of people are doing this. Podcasters, politicians, people who are on your screen like me on a daily basis, trying to get inside your brains. Moreover, moving you into a group that shares ideas. Okay. Now, for our purposes today, algorithmic authority, don't be fooled by the fancy nomenclature, algorithmic authority or algorithms. You run up against it continually, the rank ordering or top of the page logic on Google, the personalization and stream fields of Netflix. All on these, your data, facts, and symbols are rank ordered according to your previous preferences. And this position speaks to the microanalytic level of using science or algorithmic processes, that's data. Notice, when we talk about big data, we're usually interested in this process. What patterns reveal themselves in large flows of continually updating and changing data? And notice, once we do data, everybody thinks we're a scientist. You're not a scientist. You're picking what patterns to curate that scream utility to certain audiences, but you're certainly numerate. You certainly know how to code. Never confuse numbers with science. Or never confuse numbers with truth. Confuse numbers with things that can be comparable. And it's called an interval scale. And I'm not anti-numbers. Although my thesis advisor once said, have you ever used one, Wexler? And the answer still, at my age, is yes, at the bottom of every page. I've always been a word person. When you don't see things, why count them? When you hear ideas, you don't decide that the ear is not very good with numbers. It really doesn't work very well. Okay, so the idea of algorithmic authority is the way in which we now begin to compare which periphery is one that is gathered and calls together different people. So you probably belong to certain groups, and you're characterized or targeted by information, facts, and data that appeal to your group. Politicians understand this immediately. In business school, we understand that immediately. As somebody doing this today, I say, what is my audience tonight? I better make it based upon Yeats. It's an easily understandable concept. I could have chosen Hegel. I could have chosen Foucault. I could have chosen social constructionism. But Yeats and the notion of a center very clearly speaks to an audience that is interested in the stability of facts, the orderliness of truth, the clarity of factualism. So the road to post-truth is the use of algorithmic authority to create publics which share data, facts, and symbols as evidence confirm the importance of these value and facts by pointing to the large number of others holding these. So I can't be wrong because look at all the number of people like me who believe this. And this holds true for nuns. This holds true for Hell's Angels. This holds true for the NRA or for the rifle people. This holds true for white supremacists. This holds true from environmentalists. But every time we do this, we set in motion what I call the 3 C's. And here's the bite-sized chunks. We're now into TV dinner. We can put this in a microwave. We're now getting to the point where the food becomes discernible as, these are cauliflowers, these are lima beans. The 3 C's of attention markets are celebritization, curation, and controversy. I'll repeat that again. Celebritization, curation, and controversy. These are the engines that make this spinning. Celebritization, yes, the term relates to celebrity, but now addresses the process very prominent on information platforms of applying eye-catching forms of influence or clickbait in order to gather a crowd. The crowd is not valuable as a crowd, but it must be managed. That means retain, grown, and turn into a set of followers. You don't want a crowd. You want followers. When you become a follower, when you have followers, guess what you are? A leader. Leaders make followers. Leaders make followers. Leaders use information to make followers. Users get you to, especially in voluntary, get you to believe what they have to say by telling you stories that seem credible to you and people like you, but not credible to others. The story of when I do lectures for nonprofit groups and take the thought pattern of a nonprofit group and apply it to some of my corporate clients, they look at me and say, have you lost your marbles, son? That's not the way this thing is done. We're not here to make compassion or equality. We're here because there is a need to do the bottom line. And we're certainly willing to give 4% of our profits above this level to help the public, but that's not our job. And we'll find out that once you find out what public you're dealing with, you start doing what? Selecting data, facts, and information that speak to that public. Moreover, and here's where the rub comes in, that public begins to believe that fact, data, as information is true because what? They share it with others. That's called a confirmation bias. Once everybody I know believes what I believe, it must be true, or at least credible, at least reliable. And people who don't believe what I believe, and in fact believe that I'm bullshitting or that I'm wrong, they're wrong. And here begins the movement I pushed a little bit towards controversy. The second C, the data symbols, in fact, are the second C is curation. So in post-truth, we're not interested in lies. What we're interested in is curated or selected facts that are put together to tell a story in which the facts are not thick, they're thin. They appeal to a group, not a public. We are now interested in publics, audiences. You never lead the world. Trump has about 26% of the nation behind him, and Republicans have 32 and are likely to win power again. You just got to locate those 32 well. Most leaders in corporations I work with have within their control about 18 people highly dedicated to them. The rest are quite agnostic and would be willing to follow somebody else almost immediately. And some of these are people who run firms of 5, 6, 20,000 people, but the 18, like Christ and his apostles, are the influence team that then spread the word, curated in different ways, such that the different groups, whether it's in operations, the legal department, understand what the boss is saying. So you could be right, sure that Trump speaks through his minions, and these interpret it down so that the white supremacists and the Jew interested in locating in Jerusalem start going into the same tent together, although they don't like each other. Their messages are being curated and organized to create what I call a competing center. The center thins under them. Curation is really important. And algorithmic authority is key to curation, because you now have data which tells you what messages work for what public. This works for Michael Blausheim. This works for Lori Bantha. This works for Evie and Ernie Nubrin. This works for Frida Miller and Danny. This works for David Schwartz. This works for Hannah, et cetera, et cetera. The idea here is that I could piece together messages that go well together and then piece together different publics to make a counter center. And really what I want to do if I run Poland is figure out how to get to the 12 or 14% I need. If I want to run a large corporation, how do I get to 12 or 14% of the stockholders I need? Remember now, to run something doesn't mean you need a heck of a lot of people in your steeple. You need a relatively small amount. The others will come because these become translators of your message in different directions. And it's very important to know that without the algorithmic, we wouldn't have a mechanism. Now, what's interesting about the algorithmic score is it changes like the marketplace almost weekly. What are key issues this week are not the same key issues as 3 weeks ago. Biden is understanding this. Biden is not as quick a pivoter as Trump is. And you pivot most closely when you don't make a message. And let's move to the three. You pivot most closely when you don't create messages. What you do is create controversies. You draw together a crowd and you basically say that here's the message, but what's more important is these people are blocking our message. You create an in-group and you keep it together and you grow it because these people are threatening our in-group. These Mexicans, these Jews, these irksome others are the reasons we have to band together and strongly affirm what we believe in. Fight, fight, fight. We're under attack. And we're under attack because these ideas are changing so rapidly. Remember, when the center thins, people experience a dislocation. In order to balance themselves in the dislocation, they locate themselves in stable floating communities, which are tied to a vague notion of a center, which is somebody in competition to become a future center. The algorithm score is part of this need for controversy. Controversy helps solidify and grow a group. By the way, we Jews do it all the time. Every time I get a message raising money, it says that, remember the attack last week on that shul? Send money. Israel is beleaguered. Send money. When I'm raising money for the university, education is presently under great duress. Send money. And not only do I say it's under duress, but these groups are blocking it. These people are misinformed. We have not got our rightful place on the agenda. Whether we're environmentalists, whether we're Orthodox Jews, whatever periphery, fighting for its relocated center, thrives, its leaders must use controversy. Controversy is the magic elixir in a thinning center. The more controversy used, the thinner the center gets. So I am an individual who wants to gain influence. What I do is I now hire experts. The tobacco industry, environmentalists. By the way, these experts aren't necessarily mercenary. They could be true believers in the message. I'm speaking today to you as a true believer in my message. But recognize that all messages are curated. They're constructed so as to appeal to a listener, make a group, influence the group, and create capital from that group. What kind of capital do we want? Let's look at the capital that creating controversy, celebratization, and curation creates. There are 4 types of capital. I won't go into this in great detail. But the first one, of course, is that you could turn influence into money. That's called brokering, lobbying. Second, you could turn it into reputation. I want reputation. The more I become an influencer, the more people think I'm a mensch. The more they respect me. Quote, if you're interested, the more they pay attention to me. I'm narcissistic, I'm small, and I will die soon. I like the idea of being paid attention to. It is really not a secure position when you want to be attention. Kids do it all the time. In thinning, there's a great deal of effort to pay attention because you are feeling that you don't know exactly what's coming forward. You feel threatened. The third type of capital you could get is reputational money. The third type of capital you get is confirmation. I feel secure. I surround myself with people who believe what I believe. I'm not lost. I have a map. David Schwartz, Larry, Bill, Dvori Balshine, these are my people. And so I'm not lost. I belong. I belong in a time. I belong in a tent. And in that tent, I have friends. And when I pass, they'll mourn me. They'll shell my ideas. They'll know I'm in the White Rock Cemetery. They'll visit. By the way, the idea of a confirmation experience lends solidity to your identity. Remember, identity must be contained. When we lose our center identity, thinking of ourselves now in the microcosm, we don't want to be flooded. To be alone in an old hotel room with pea stains on your underwear and a dripping tap. Alone, alone, alone. Naked, naked, naked. Tired, desolate, and faint of heart. This is scary. So what we look is we want capital. Part of that capital is called social capital. Let me have people around me, music, entertainment, love, distraction. It is very important. Most of you will call it community. Remember, though, in contingency, community is your community and other people have their community. In foundationalism, we're all part of one community. That distinction must be kept. The last type of capital, or the last type of reward you get for winning influence, is that you leave a legacy. Each one of us, I remember my dad was a very lovely man, Zalman. And he was an entrepreneur, self-made, grade 3 education. Fish was spelled Phish. Wonderful man, smart as all get up and go. Grade 3. Went to work. His father died when he was very young. Got hit by a tram in Saint Jerome, Quebec, streetcar. And anyhow, one day, my father wanted me to go into his business. And I told him I wanted to study philosophy. He wanted me to take over and work at Samuelson men's clothing, where he had become a macher. And I told him, no, I wanted to become an academic. He said, academic, what is that for? You know, so I remember I took him over to the McGill Library, and I had at that point published 3 little books. And I brought him over and said, Dad, when you and I go, those will be there. My father was a pretty interesting guy. He looked and said, hey, kid, I get you. Yeah, do it. It's good. It's good. He understood that I was interested in the capital that comes from influence. It had sticking power. That's why each one of us wants our kids to have an idea of who we were. We want to have influence. That's why we want to found something. We want to be a somebody, to have influence. Now, to close this discussion, and recognize that I am being controversial and understand it, and I'm going to close and turn to questions in a second. And I do thank you for your forbearance in the twisty way in which my mind works. I want to talk about post-truth as both positive and negative, just to get away from this idea that you find in the literature that obviously post-truth is all about lies. It's not about lies. It's about the fact that there is very little verification of the facts at this point in time, because there are multiple contending facts based upon multiple publics. The negative side about this, if we take foundationalism too strong, you get big brotherism. Okay, if we want so much truth, you get in the way of creativity. That's called centralization, surveillance capitalism. Moshe is not allowed to think what Moshe thinks. Okay, thought police. But if we get too thin, too much contingency thinking, we get a form of breakdown, anarchy. Child molesters are given their freedom. Ponzi schemes thrive. Creativity soars. By the way, if we want to be creative, let 1,000 flowers bloom, and some of them will be very poisonous. Thank you very much for your attention. I will now, if not entertain, at least ask David as he's collected any questions, answer them more briefly than I have this hour and a half, or now hour and 45-minute lecture. And thank you again. I hope I have kept your attention. I notice most of you have a blank screen, so I assume you are watching some form of Netflix and have me in the background as a kind of interesting but noisy character. And I like that, don't worry. Much of what I have to say is noise. Thank you very much.
Mark, thank you very much. Larry will thank you more fully later, but it's question time. So to kick it off.
Oh, and I will thank all you guys more clearly at the end. Okay, I haven't forgotten how much I owe to the people who put this together. But yes, sorry.
Okay, so I'm thinking of running for political office. I'm thinking of hiring Cambridge Analyticals or some competitor to them. So they're not going to get me to 51 or 40%. You're telling me I only need about 28%, and I'm a shoo-in. And how? And what are they going to tell me? What are they going to tell me?
They're going to tell you what images, symbols, and facts work best in order. Now, you don't want 28%. You want them located in certain parts of the public. It's not the numbers. Trump doesn't win because he locates them in states where he has the ability largely to take small numbers and turn them into big wins. Hillary won way more votes than Trump, 6 million more. or I think it's 3 million more, yeah, but lost the election because Trump located them in the right publics. So the idea that we're getting to with data analytics, and you're correct, David, is particularly perspicacious on picking up a group that sells algorithms. That was one of the first to get into this, and got a bad name because of it, because largely they were helping to treat politics as if it was selling soap. Most of us don't like the analogy that politicians really are like soap salesmen or like Madison Avenue, but they are. They are not because I say it. It's because in order to put together multiple publics, what you want to do is figure out how to create a messaging system, then an agenda that, and don't worry, you could, as it changes, you also have to have it robustly ambiguous, so that when you're talking Newfoundland, it also plays well in Alberta. So there's certain factors that you need in, but you want to put together a story. All stories are made up of facts, images, and data. Think about when you look at the screen, what you are finding is facts, images, and data. And guess what your mind does? It puts together a story. And really what we want to do is get that story not accepted and bought by all, but accepted and got by targeting certain publics. Notice Trump brings together motorcycles, white supremacists, and also brings together dislocated iron workers, people who have recently lost their job in Virginia, fossil fuel workers, people who normally wouldn't feel at all comfortable with others. The idea is not to make together multiple stories around a center which is curated for the purposes of influence gathering. Remember now, you don't want to own land. To be wealthy today, what you want to do is be influential. Money may go up and down, but the job today for people I teach is influence. You could turn influence. Influence is right now the thing that can be turned into more forms of capital than any other. Money certainly is a way to get influence, but it has a way of being controlled by others. That's why Bitcoin is a thinning of the center form of money. With Bitcoin, what you do is you take the center out and everybody becomes their own banker. But notice that when you get Bitcoin, you might get one of those poison flowers I talked about earlier. Did I sidestep or turn your question into Irish too, David?
No, that's fine. And so Trump perhaps wants to come back in 2024. Does he stay with the same game plan, or is there something new in the works?
No, I believe you're correct to point out that part of retaining a message is called issue clustering. Issue clustering is that there's 3 techniques for issue clustering. I've written, well, let me give you the very quick. Issue clustering is you want to capture an audience, but that's not the end. Then you want to retain and grow it. But the problem is you don't know what future is going to bring, which is uncertainty. So your message has to basically be such that new ideas coming in could be absorbed in your message. The key to absorbing the message are 3 ones. Trump has heretofore used the nostalgia message. The nostalgia message glorifies a past. Make America great again. That message will not work in the future. He's now going to use the idea of the future of America, which Biden tried. The 3 messages are nostalgia message, which is the past, radical presentism, which is mindfulness message, which is used by politicians that are interested in, by and large, attracting millennials to the fold. Mindfulness is a very big grab right now. Very, very useful. I use it a good deal in my lectures. Go to your happy place, baby, kind of approach, and let's locate our happy place in the story. And the key is largely we have to create our happy place. And notice that we find that Zen in modern notions of sustainability. And the other one is this idea of future making or world making. and Trump is going to use the world making. America is going to remake the world in a democratic manner, which is an entirely different way. And the way he's going to do it is to bash China stronger than he ever did. And I think he may turn on Russia. But the point about future making is always about arrêter les blocages, stop the blockage. Jesus, French. Stop the blockage. And the idea of a blockage, of course, are other people who are getting in your way. Biden right now has a blockage inside his own party. He's got real troubles. So I believe Trump pivots and moves to an area he's not very strong on, and that is the enemy. And organizing all of America against the enemy. McCarthy did it using communism and a very, very thin notion of the fear. Trump's going to do it based upon the very see, we were going back to the past because the present was in disarray. But now he recognizes that the version of the past no longer holds because it's sort of in disarray. So now let's make the whole world an American future. A return to empire, but a return to a future empire. And in the future empire, Trump's not going to turn to technology. I believe he's going to turn to military. And the nation may be ready for military. I hear the boots churning in Ukraine. I hear the boots churning in Africa. I hear the I mean, I've lost my vision, but I hear boots. I hear boots. If you don't hear boots, you don't have my ears.
Somebody has commented here that the promise of a country with a future is sort of a nostalgia if the country is crumbling.
He's not incorrect. I believe that the idea of the future American empire will resemble the idea of Jefferson writ large, rife with the absence of egalitarianism, rife with slavery, rife with elitism. So the idea here is not a utopian future. The idea in the future, imagined by Trump, not by me, is a future in which the world is run by people like him. But that's always been his position. But the idea was we were going to go in the last election to the past, to an America absent and shorn of immigrants, an America in which new technologies and alternate technologies really didn't have a place, a return to fossil fuels. I believe Trump's going to pivot on that, and not pivot because he's agile, pivot because he still will use the message of controversy, but controversy pushed into the world level rather than into the idea of the region state, the return to, but the individual's right. Past and future all become one in storytelling. The storytelling he's talking about in Trump, that is not me. I give you my version of the future. It's really not. I'm not influencing at that level. But the Trump's version of the future is planetary cronyism. Him and Putin are similar. The real alternative now, there's two alternatives in my geopolitical read. The Nordic nations of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and China as alternatives. Both of them have centers. The one of the centers is a highly taxed center with very little elite other than strong. The other one is a government as center, China. Trump's has really, in my opinion, a very thin way of crowd raising is his only message. I'm not suggesting it's not powerful. My whole theory is that if you raise a crowd, you will get powerful. Look at the French Revolution. Look at the beer hall putschs of a house painter called Hitler. Get attention in these days. And it's easier to get attention now than ever on the screen. So to the individual who asked that question, thank you. In dialectical, the difference between the story about the past and the story about the future is a matter of where you project your voice. In the past election, Trump projected his voice into remember America. In the future, he's going to say, remember America, but we got to bring this America to the world's future. And he'll be dealing with very different enemies. I believe the America, if Trump gets in, might be an America in which American and allies' boots are spread in the name of stopping irksome others.
Mark, in terms of climate change, what era are we in? A post-truth era with a panel of experts who disagree?
Unfortunately, the science of climate change is not in a post-truth era. The transfer from science to politics is post-truth, or from theory to application, or from the lab. I believe the facts on climate change are very real and clear. I believe their translation and use by influencers is, and that's my point here, that facts get curated. And they get curated by individuals in a post-truth era that are looking for influence. So if I'm curating from the fossil fuel industry, I'm taking that data and using it for very different purposes than the David Suzuki Foundation, or from my relative Liz's position within a sustainable, save the planet version of the ocean. So there is always a version of the center in post-truth. That means science is not dead. It's just lost its power as the dominant influencer, much like the church is not dead. It is no longer, not like America is dead. It is no longer a dominant influence. Remember now, in your own life, you have a central life identity. When you start entering into post-truth, you have multiple identities and you're not sure what exactly is the center. I bring this up because I'm in the process of retiring at the end of the year. And I'm saying, well, when they ask me, who am I? What do I say now? You know, I had a really kind of simple answer when it stopped me at, I remember one year, I got robbed and I was in San Francisco. At that time I was hitchhiking. I was going back over the border and they asked me who I was. And I told them I was a professor at the university. At that time I was working in Ann Arbor, Michigan. But that I had been robbed, and at that time I was white caned, so you know, they were kind of looking at me a little askance. You know, a blind hitchhiker is not exactly the kind of dude you associate with being a professor and one who has no wallet and no money. And I remember I said, "Yeah, I'm a professor. Phone the university," and they did, and it was Sunday and it was closed, and they kept me overnight. I had no identity. I had no center. I could not establish my facts. Post-truth is interesting. You may have the facts, but other people say, no, that's not the documents we need here. You are a yellow star. You don't have the same truth as those people. So climate change has a fact pattern. It has a center. However, we are transferring it into the public domain. We are putting it on screen, curating the facts in selective manners, drawing publics into controversy so as to influence these publics in manners that will build capital for the influencers. Thank you for whoever asked that question. A good question. Notice when I say a good question, I'm usually flattering the questioner, but it is really not my intention. That was a good question.
Mark, we try to stop at about 9 o'clock and we've hit that number. So I'm going to turn it over to Larry. And
thank you. May I thank, do we give my brief thank you before Larry does his thank you?
Sure.
This is like my wife, Judy, who's a forever thanker. I'd like to thank all of you for coming, first of all. I've taken 2 hours of your time. You will never relive those hours, so I owe you. I would also like to thank the men's group at Temple Sholom for creating a public platform which brings in various speakers, and you should check these various speakers. And more specifically, I'd like to thank my wife, Judy Oberlander. Without her, I'd be a log floating in the ocean or a barge that's been upset and on the beach at Sunset Beach. She is my staff and my rod. And I don't say that. I could whip up my white cane and show you, kind of thing. And Judy is that. There's a great song. I'm going to get me a walking stick, walk down Drury Lane. And Judy's that walking stick. She's also become, so thank you, Judy. I would also like to thank Larry and David. The heavy lifting of creating a event like this goes to the people who organize it. I'm merely a yapping dog. And I don't mean that to derogate myself, but like the musician, somebody's got to own the theater. Somebody's got to bring me into it. So thank you. And last, I would like to suggest by word of mouth, if you know somebody who couldn't get on due to the fact that we're oversubscribed, please write to me or Wexler at sfu.ca or my wife, Judy Oberlander, who's better at this because she actually responds. And we'll send you the record, or we'll send your friends because you've got this. Or if you'd like the recording of this to keep as noise in the background, please let me know via Judy or Mark Wexler at sfu.ca, and we'll send you a transcript. Last, as I mentioned to you earlier, I'm getting surgery on February 3rd, transplant. So the next time you see me, I may actually be able to read screen and answer your questions more directly. I give a little prayer out to my doctor, Dr. Simon Holland, and thank him for a steady hand on February 3rd. And last, but certainly not least, I want to extend a great deal of thank you to my parents and my parent-in-laws, who all have now left the planet and left my generation in charge. It's a tough road, but we'll do what we can. Tikkun Olam, and thank you.
Mark, it's Larry here. First of all, I want to thank you so much. Your presentation, as always, was dynamic, informative, mesmerizing, fantastic. Thank you so much for giving of your time. And yes, thank you, Judy, for helping us put this together tonight with Mark. Mark, I especially want to wish you much good fortune with your upcoming surgery. We'll all be thinking about you for sure. And hopefully all goes as planned. And the next time we have you as a speaker, and there will be next times plural, you will have your presentations up on the screen, and you'll be reading the emails and so on and so forth. I also want to wish you, I'm sure we'll correspond or talk before then, but I want to wish you much good luck with your retirement that's coming up at the end of this year, which you've alluded to. As someone who's retired in the last few years, I could tell you I'm enjoying it, and I'm sure you will as well. You'll just have that much more time to prepare your presentations for the men's club. So thank you, Mark. And thanks to everyone who came tonight. Stay safe, stay well. These are extraordinary times, but thank you all for coming. And good night. And thank you, David Schwartz. Good night, everyone. Thanks, Mark.
Good night. God bless you all.
Night.